to This Just In with This Just In as your host, Justin Core. This is a show where we take a deeper dive into the stories most important to you, the issues most important to you, with sometimes the people at the very center of those issues. And today, a very special correspondent on This Just In, the mayor of the town where I grew up. It is Mayor Robert Simison of Meridian. Mayor, how's it going?
It's a beautiful day. I love to say it's a beautiful day in Meridian, but of course we're over here at the studio. So, but over there it's pretty good too.
We're not that far apart, so we pretty much get the same weather over here in West Boise. So, Mayor, we're going to get to the changes we've both seen in Meridian over the past few years. There's been a ton. First, though, we're going to talk about you. You're an Idaho native, born and raised in Pocatello. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I kind of lived out in the country, so
Nice.
it was kind of a very interesting place to grow up. I was about 3.5 miles outside of Ingham and closer to about 6 miles outside of Pocatello. So between a small city of about 800 and a larger city of about 50,000, which at the time was the second largest city in Idaho.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for pretty much all the time I grew up there, that's what Pocatello was, and so had the 5-acre place along the river, so you felt a little country, and you could go to a small town, but you could go to the big city. So I kind of had the best of everything.
Yeah, I grew up on about an acre, so it's not too much to work with. Sort of just enough. 5 acres. That's awesome. Any fun stories growing up out there on that 5 acres?
Oh, well, the fun stories start probably when I was later, when we were cutting logs and doing that out of our property.
Cool.
When I got into junior high school, my stepdad started logging, and so I spent a lot of time in the woods, and we'd bring the wood down to our property and cut it up and block it up and sell it to people and gorge the wood. And it's a lot of hard work, but a lot of good fun.
Yes.
It was good work ethic that was developed out of that. And I think the most interesting part was, because you're in the country, and I would getting my driver's license. Had to ride my bike, 8 miles each way.
8 miles each way. This sounds like a story I tell my kids sometimes.
Exactly.
Like it was uphill both ways.
Well, in Pocatello, it was into the wind both ways. But that was, and occasionally you could get a ride and get dropped off. But, that you had to do that every day for several weeks in order to do driver's training to get to your license. So I really value my driver's license. If there's one thing that growing up and where I did, that was probably what it was. Is like my driver's license. I still look at that today and like I earned that.
Yeah. My dad grew up on a farm as well. He always said, man, when it was time to get my driver's license, I knew exactly what I was doing because I had been driving tractor for, 10 years and backing up trucks for your dad. Probably the actual driving part wasn't a big issue for you. It was just getting there.
Yes. The commitment to getting there was the challenge. But it was a good one.
Yeah.
And I wasn't alone. My neighbor, who was the same age, he had the same issues. So, we either had to coordinate with each other or be riding home together.
Yeah. Well, you talk about logging out there. Man, I can't imagine maybe a more physically demanding sort of job.
Yeah. I mean, and it started off very simply. We would drive up to Island Park with an old grain truck.
Yeah.
And we'd cut logs up there on the premise and buck them into the size and put them in and go drop them off at someone's house. And then as we progressed throughout the years, we had a skidder, and he'd buy little plots of logs that were being auctioned off, and we'd go up there and we'd take the logs down, and then we'd bring them down to our property and do the work down at our property. And that's when stuff was being done closer
Right.
around us when we get the logs. We weren't going to Island Park for the logs at that point in time. It was just outside of Pocatello. But it just progressed through that. And I think if you go to Google Earth, you can still see some of those logs that were on the property or where they were on the property at the time. So.
Man, that is awesome. So you grew up out there, eastern Idaho, doing logging and all that, driving, and then you went to college in Walla Walla, Washington, at Whitman. And I was joking on the rundown that I sent to you, home of the fighting onions. You're like, no. It's actually the home of the fighting missionaries, which is an interesting sort of dichotomy. What was it like going to college at Whitman?
Whitman really gave me a lot of my foundations and where I am today.
Nice.
And so it was one of those things where I went there, and it was a beautiful campus, beautiful part. And at the time, Walla Walla was not a thriving community. But it was a place where I was able to go there, and I made some really good friends and some people, and that really helped set me on my career path. Where I'd never done student government or anything else in high school.
Oh, interesting.
And I joined the Phi Delta Theta fraternity, and the gentleman who kind of brought me in that fraternity said, "You know what, Robert, we think you'd be good in student government. So we're gonna put you in and help you run for comptroller." And that was really the start of my interest in politics and government. And
Wow.
So it was there at good old Whitman, who are now the Blues. I think they'd be upset if I didn't say that. Since
They're now
changed
the
their
Blues.
name.
They're not the Onions. They're not still the Fighting Missionaries. Yes, the Blues. Absolutely. So smaller town. You went there to get your history degree. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually went there to become a high school math teacher, like my dad was.
Oh.
That was my intention, and then I
Okay.
realized I wasn't as good at math as I thought, and I had other interests. So history was really one of those things that it wasn't so much to get about the history degree that that I thought I'd come out and I'd be working in the field of history. It was an interest. I've always had an interest in history, and they had a great professor there who I took a early on class from, G. Thomas Edwards, and he just really kind of enticed me into that major, especially learning about the history of the Pacific Northwest along with them. And so, but politics, government was my minor.
Oh,
and,
okay,
and
gotcha.
so but both of them were really a lot of the same. It was really a study of what happened in time through those two different lenses.
What do you think was so interesting to you? Why do you think politics really called to you?
Yeah, I think I look at it in the concept of I look at it into the concept of governing. I don't really think about politics. Yes, politics is a part. It's always been, but I've been lucky enough, in most of the positions I've been, it's been more about governing. And to me, that's what really drives it. I'm always about trying to find good public policy that provides a framework for government to be successful. And it's not about yes, there are conflicts of ideas that occur that often result from politics.
Yeah.
But that part of it was not what I was about. It was just about, I want to make sure the best thing can be done, and how do I help make that happen?
Yeah. I've often said that politics is my favorite sport because it sort of plays out that way, like a game, two different actors, pieces, opinions sort of working against each other. But you talked about, just governing, making a difference. Do you think that was a part of it as well? Like just really affecting people's lives in a positive way?
I think that's what's evolved into. When you're in student
When
government,
you're in college, it's like,
it's a little different. I mean, it was about then like what bands are we going to try to help bring on to campus? It wasn't my job as eventually became student body president. That wasn't my job to do that. That was our activities person. But you're part of the team that's looking at that. My job was to just be that conduit a lot of times to the administration, and make sure that the students' needs were being supported by the administration as best they could, and working with the team to make that happen.
Awesome. And then you found your way from there to actual governance, or at least helping it along on Capitol Hill. And we're going to talk about that more next right here on This Just In. Welcome back to This Just In with the mayor of the great city of Meridian, Robert Simison. Mayor, we talked about your time growing up in eastern Idaho, and then there at Walla Walla in college, and then you found your way to Congress, working behind the scenes. How did that happen?
Well, so again, I was going to go back to Whitman.
Yeah.
Two things happened. One of the people that was in student government with me, one of my fraternity brothers, he ended up going back to D.C. right after graduation. He got a job working back there, and I came back to Idaho. I was here in Boise for about a year.
Oh, okay.
And he reached out to me one day and said, you need to be here. This is really the stuff that that really drove you and do that. And so I ended up heading out there and slept on his couch and got an internship
Wow.
with a congressman from the state of Washington, using my Whitman relationships to do that. The person I interned with, his name was Rick White, and he served on then the Energy and Commerce Committee as a member. And I was coming up on, I was down to like my last $100. They don't really pay you when you do those internships. And I was like, I got about enough money to get back to Idaho. Gas was a little cheaper back then. Or find a place to live and put down deposit. And but there was a job opening in Energy and Commerce, and I applied, and I started answering the phones for the committee in January of 2007, thanks to the kind of those following those relationships. And from there, I stayed with the committee for 10 years. Wow. And just kind of worked my way up to eventually where I was working with our general counsel and really helping run the back end of the committee in terms of our process and procedure, making sure our hearings where we bring in people to testify on issues, or bills when we would mark up and do the amendment process, or do the floor work where a bill would go over to the House floor and we'd have people talking pro and con on that. It was helping make sure all that happened on the back end. Mm-hmm. And so I always talk about the different parts, but in government, you've got politics, you got process, and you got policy. And knowing all three, it makes you a great player. And if you don't know because if you don't know the process, it doesn't matter how good you are at the politics. If you don't know the policy, you're not going to produce good results. You got to kind of know it. And so it was really, I got to work on two of the three. Primarily process, a little bit of policy. We left the politics to the congressman.
That had to be fascinating, though. That really interests me. And we were talking before we went on, so many of the bills went through that committee. I mean, you saw nearly everything.
Yeah, I mean, and you're hearing it play out in today's world too. Talking about Medicaid and Medicare. A lot of all that stuff is part of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and we did that work when I was back there at the same time, where you're constantly looking at the costs and what's fundable and what makes sense, and between that and one of the big ones I worked on was the Energy Policy Act at the time, where they were talking about modular nuclear reactors, which are now part of the conversation about what does our energy look like in the next generation.
Yeah.
And it was policy that was being developed back then that's still, that was back in the early 2000s, and here we are 20 years later, finally getting to the outcomes of some of that work that was done.
Yeah. So you learned a little about process, policy, or a lot about both. Why did you decide to make a change?
My wife and I had our second child, and while living in D.C. was a fabulous experience, it wasn't home, and so we said after the elections of 2006, where the Democrats regained control of Congress, I had the option to stay, but I felt like that was a great breaking point for me to come back. My job was one that worked better when you're in the majority, not needed as much when you're in the minorities of the party, and so we decided let's go home. So we picked up and we moved back. I moved my family back in 2006, and I did the congressional commute for about 4 months, going back and forth as we were wrapping things up. And then, I did the amazing thing of buying a house here in the Treasure Valley. Right about the month of April of 2007.
No.
I think people know what happened not long after that.
Yeah, I'm not a history major, but I recall, yeah. You had the crash right after that.
Yes.
Whoa. So you grew up, though, in eastern Idaho. Mm-hmm. So why Meridian?
Well, our parents, my wife's parents, I was from Pocatello. My wife was from Post Falls. Her parents had just moved to Meridian. Mm-hmm. And so that was, and we want to be close to family, especially with kids. And so we said, if we're going to move back, my wife spent 10 years in Pocatello while she was at ISU. Nice. And she kind of said, I'm done with the cold and the wind. And I did not spend any time up north, but I was like, if we go up north, I want to be closer to a ski area. I don't want to be in Post Falls. I would rather be further north. And she
Yeah.
was like, no, if we're going up north, it's got to be in that area. So we said the Treasure Valley makes sense.
Yes.
So
right in between.
so we came back. Our first house was in the southeast portion of Boise, is where we
Shh, I won't tell anyone.
It's all right. Honestly, it's the only place we could find in our price range. There was like,
Wow.
Again, the market was going up and up, and we found a place. We were about half a mile from the Meridian boundaries at that point in time.
Close enough.
And stuff. So, but it's where we got our start here in the valley. And as we were able to build ourselves out of our house that we were upside down in, we were eventually able to build a home in Meridian.
Nice.
And move into our current home.
Fantastic. And then you became the chief of staff for a very popular mayor, Tammy DeVere, a position you held until you were elected mayor in 2019. We're going to talk about your tenure there as chief of staff. What was it like?
Well, it was fascinating because it's really, the city was growing. The mayor's position was evolving. My position in serving the mayor was evolving. So everything is almost like a brand new job every 6 months because things were just progressing, whether it was, we're going to go from this website that was developed by a family friend to something that was more traditional and done that was going to be a little bit more robust. So it was a constant evolution of a growing city to meet the demands of the community, and it was just a fascinating time, to be honest with you. I was learning a lot along the way, but contributing a lot to the new community as it was evolving in that context.
For people who don't know, can you sort of explain the job of a chief of staff?
Well, it varied throughout the time, but really it came down to is I helped run the mayor's office, the staff that were there, so the doing the things that were her priorities, programs, communications, all those different aspects. As part of in this context, the city's leadership team. So our directors are your fire chief, your police chief, human resources attorney. Those are all appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. Chief of staff is just hired by the mayor, but it's part of that team in essence.
Gotcha.
And each city's going to do a little differently. Chief of staff is generally what I would say they're a co-partner. They're a conduit between the mayor and the directors when needed. They don't oversee the directors in our case. They are just part of the team, but they also provide that guidance of here's where the mayor wants to go and help do the functions of government that aren't necessarily, like I say, the police, the fire. It's a lot of those other ancillary things that you want to do that the community kind of wants you to be in connection with. So the chief of staff kind of runs that and does a lot of external relations work in that context. But it's really a jack of all trades when it comes down to it. And the person in it can help dictate a lot about the direction and that things should be moving in.
Yeah, sort of the position itself, its identity. Well, then you decided to change your position. You ran for mayor. What prompted that?
I'd been there for 13 years.
Yeah.
And I'd been looking at making a change of some sort and been having some conversations, looking at some new opportunities. And in conversations with Mayor Tammy, I think she was also maybe interested in looking at some other opportunities. And so she said, Robert, if you'd be interested in running, I won't run. And so that was the conversation. And, it was one of those things I had to think hard about it. Yeah. But I had run for the state legislature in 2012 in the first closed Republican primary and had lost. That didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. While I was looking for a new change, I knew that the job of mayor was not chief of staff. Yeah. That there would be new challenges and new opportunities. And so it wasn't about the organization that I needed to change, but it was just my role within the organization. And I said, I've been part of building what we were building. I believed in the work we were doing. she wanted someone that would continue doing the work that she had put in place. So it wasn't just, there was a lot of reasons why I made sense, I think, in her mind to do that, is to continue the efforts that we were focused on. And I said, I'd like to run another campaign and be successful, and I'd like to continue the work that we're doing because it'd be fun, and it'll give me an opportunity to grow and challenge myself. And it's a great community, so why not?
Yeah, that had to mean a lot from you to essentially get that stamp of approval.
Oh, a huge amount. She was a great boss and mentor and friend, and for her to come in and give me that opportunity in that context, it meant a lot.
Yeah, and then you had that election, and you already talked about it. I don't know if people out there realize this as much, but like it's rough being in an election because you are yourself out there. You're essentially asking people to vote for like you. This is not an issue. This is not an idea. It's you. So, boy, when you get that loss, that is rough. I've heard other candidates talk about it, like, man, like just puts you in a funk. But you're like, it's worth it to the community for me to get back out there in really a crowded field in that election. A lot of sort of well-known people. Then you come out on top. That had to be, again, sort of an incredible thing for you personally and professionally to get that nod from the people.
Yeah, it's really one of those interesting things going through an election is because to me the community will figure it out. They're looking for people where values align, and when you're knocking on doors, you get that sense of, are my values aligning with their values? Or my vision aligning with their vision for what they want? Mm-hmm. And really the only way you can get that is by having those conversations with people. Mm-hmm. And it felt right when I was doing it. I felt like the conversations I was having were the conversations that people wanted to be having at the time. And so while, yes, it was rewarding to feel validated in the outcome at that point in time, it really just made me say, where I think we need to go is where the majority of the community agrees. And I understand that at the same time, when my values and my direction don't align with the community, I shouldn't be the one doing the job.
Yeah. We'll talk more about the issues facing the city, challenges there in our next episode. But right now, has anything surprised you about being the mayor? I mean, I know you were chief of staff for 13 years, so you probably saw a lot being right next there to the mayor. So has anything surprised you?
Yeah, I don't know that there's been a lot of surprises.
Yeah.
But there's obviously been things that have happened, COVID as an example, that you never expected. And so, I think that there's a big difference between a surprise and something that's not expected. But just, the impacts that has and the conversations that you had to have that you never thought you would have with people, whether at the door or, on the phone. Those were some very interesting times, to put it mildly.
Yes, interesting to put it mildly. Well, Mayor, thank you for that, and we're going to wrap up this episode of This Just In with Mayor Simison after this. Welcome back to This Just In with the Mayor of Meridian, Robert Simison. Mayor, okay, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask every guest. What would your walk-up or your entrance music be?
Well, I'd have to go to my favorite band, Journey.
Nice.
So that I Don't Stop Believing. It's that anthem, but it was really part of my growing up. I mean, Journey was in their heyday at the time when I was really starting to listen to music.
Yeah.
And that I probably wore out that cassette tape. Growing up.
Listening to Journey, just logging. Awesome. Don't Stop Believing.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, Mayor, thank you for your time. This is just part one, episode one of my conversation with the Mayor of Meridian, Robert Simison. If you have any comments or questions, though, go ahead and send them right here, 208-321-5614, hashtag JustIN. And don't stop believing. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, because tomorrow, or at least in a week, we're going to have the next episode of This Just In with the Mayor right here. See you next time.